But if we have DNA, we can put that into CODIS as a what's called an unsub, an unknown suspect. And every month or so, the database recycles and looks for new things that have come through, and that's exactly how this guy got caught. He got caught by a CODIS hit. He was in jail, got arrested on a federal drug crime up in Ohio. And this is like 7, 8 years after I did my profile on him. He got extradited down here back in the summer last year, I think. Yes, sir.
So when he would go inside their apartments, was he basically trying to get a feel for the person who went into their apartment? Was he kind of like profiling what they had?
No, and this is my speculation, but I don't think that was his motive. That's you're thinking like a profiler actually. But what he was doing was polishing his entrance because he wanted to be able to get in and out in the way he wanted to get in and out. So he got a feel for where everything was, are there any dogs here, how many people live here, that sort of thing. He was confirming somebody he had already chosen. So he had already picked his victim, and he just came back later to do it as efficiently as he could, which gave him the luxury. As I said, there was one victim he spent, I think, 12 hours with, raped repeatedly over a 12-hour period, made a sandwich, just very comfortable.
How did she not make enough noise for someone to hear over 12 hours?
Well, one of the things that you have to understand about being a victim of crime, perpetrators rely on a victim that is submissive, a submissive victim. And they do all kinds of things that make it reasonable that people will be submissive. So if I came up to you, let's say you're Walmart or whatever, and I put a knife to your kidney back here, and I put my hand around your neck and say, if you talk, I'm going to stick this knife in your kidney, what are you going to do? You're going to do what I tell you to do. Now, the smart thing to do would be to scream, but what do you obviously risk? You risk getting stabbed. Now, it's easy for us to say, oh yeah, I'd scream. You can say that sitting here in this comfy little place, in this comfy little room, until you are in that situation. You cannot know the kind of anxiety and fear that you will have. Let me kind of put this in another context for you. I'm trained with firearm. I carry my gun regularly. I've only had to pull my gun one time. I never had to shoot at anybody, and nobody's ever shot at me. But the time that I had to pull my gun, my hands were shaking. Now, I was fully trained, and trained to the point, if any of you are into firearms or anything that you do repeatedly, if you're a public speaker, those little nervous butterflies you have when you go to stand in front of people, you can't fully get rid of that. But the more you do it and the more you're trained, the better you get at doing that. But that moment when I realized, oh my gosh, I might have to shoot somebody, I was petrified. And in our heads, we could say, oh yeah, anybody that pull a gun on me, yeah, I'll shoot them. I don't care if they're 100 miles away. We have these grandiose ideas about our courage. But the fact is, it is way harder, and none of us can predict how we'll actually behave. Now, I'm not saying that these people by any means are cowards. That's not the point at all. I'm simply saying, when you're faced with the risk of being killed or seriously wounded, people will accept a lot. And their standards go down. For most of you in this room, especially women in here, if you were thinking, oh, I don't want to be raped, I'd rather be stabbed than raped, oh yeah, I'm going to take... I doubt that. Because when it comes to facing it, your standard goes here. In other words, you're saying, okay, I just want to get out of this alive, as opposed to I want to get out of this with my virginity. Do you see what I'm saying? So while it might seem logical to scream and yell, that doesn't always work very well. Even highly trained police officers, career police officers, sometimes freeze up when it comes to pulling their firearm. There's one case, one of my buddies at the FBI Academy, his specialty was what's called critical incidents. And these are situations where a police officer has to fire his or her weapon. And these are all investigated thoroughly by every department. Sometimes, like in our state, the GBI investigates these cases and so forth. So there's lots of data out there. One of the most interesting cases of this was a police officer who had been in a critical incident and was reviewed by somebody like me. I've done a few of these, so it's called fitness for duty. Officer's been involved in a critical incident, comes in, we work together a little while, and it's our job to determine, is this person ready to go back to the street to patrol or whatever. whoever did the fitness for duty for this guy said, yeah, he's ready to go. 2 weeks after he got back on patrol, he gets called to a robbery in progress at like a Quickie Mart. Pulls his unit up to the front of the Quickie Mart as the perpetrator's coming out. The officer steps out, draws his weapon on this perpetrator, and orders him to the ground. The perpetrator walked up to him, took his gun away from him, and shot him and killed him. Okay? Now you chuckle, but I'm telling you the story to get you to recognize even highly trained people can't do what seems to be logical in that situation because the situation itself is just so unusual. So I hate to use the word terrifying because there are other emotions that go into it, but it's just a situation you can't know what you do until it happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the guy that said he could go back, get in trouble.
I'm sorry?
The guy that said it was okay to go back on
No,
the street.
no. It is a judgment call. It's a professional judgment. So people come through my practice. Okay, people that come through my practice, I make judgment calls all the time. Fortunately, I've never been wrong about something like that, but it could happen. It's a probability. All right, we just got about 5 minutes. Any other questions? Yes, sir?
How hard is it, let's say you're sitting next to someone in an automobile, front seat, how hard is it to strangle them to death with your bare hand?
You're sitting next to them? I'm not going to be riding with you, am I, anywhere? No.
I don't know if you're familiar with the Serial podcast that Sarah Koenig did about the murder in 1999. The teenager was convicted of killing his ex-girlfriend. The English side is listening to that, trying to decide. And that's supposedly how he...
Well, let me answer kind of a bigger question, and hopefully we can apply here and answer your question. What you see on TV and what you see in the movies is not how it works. For one thing, people can be shot or stabbed multiple times and be fine. People can be shot or stabbed once and not be fine. It depends on where it is. I've worked with a couple of teens that have killed people, and one of the common things I've heard is it wasn't like it was on TV. It's not. What you see on TV sometimes is people strangle somebody and they fall over and pass out, and they're passed out for a half an hour. That is not realistic. If you passed out for a half an hour, you got big troubles, especially if you get thumped on the back of the head. Your autonomic nervous system is going to kick in, and simple strangulation is going to kick in as soon as you lose unconsciousness and that airway is open. So assuming somebody closes off your airway, they have to keep that airway closed off for several minutes for you to actually expire. Now you'll lose consciousness within about 30 to 60 seconds. So the answer to your question, could somebody do that from the side seat? Well, it depends on how strong their hands were, or if they used some tool to close off that airway, but they would have to keep it closed off for a period of time. If you've got a small or weaker perpetrator and a big and stronger victim, that is less likely from that position because it's hard to move against the thumb, which is what they would have to, that would be their weak point in terms of holding. Ligatures would be much more efficient in that way. Now that doesn't consider crushing the trachea. That's a whole different story, but that would involve quite a bit of strength as well. That side, yeah, it's possible. Okay? Yes, ma'am. Or is that sir? I'm so sorry. I don't have my glasses on. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, I just saw here.
Perpetrators who use a gun, perpetrators who use a knife. What does using a gun say about it?
Okay, what he asked is, I mentioned earlier there's a difference between a perpetrator who uses a firearm and a perpetrator who uses actually any kind of close contact weapon, a blunt instrument, a ligature, a knife, anything like that. In order to kill somebody close up, any of those other three, you've got to have either strength, superiority, manipulative superiority, or the willingness to get in somebody's personal space, or the need to get in somebody's personal space. So those are all things that we have to consider. A gun is a distance weapon, so depending on the kind of firearm, I mean, you could literally kill somebody from half a mile away if you're good enough shot. And the closeness to the crime tells me something about a person, so we can get distance from a crime by hiring somebody to do it for us, right? So we're in essence moving yet another step beyond that crime as opposed to something that you do to somebody you know and you care about in terms of a passion. You know, this is somebody who's hurt me or wounded me in some emotional kind of way. When we do that, not only do we do something close, but we also do very personal sorts of killing. In other words, people get stabbed, they're stabbed repeatedly. Or they're killed after they're dead already. Okay, so post-mortem wounds. So I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to kill you some more. That's how bad I want you dead. As opposed to somebody who shoots one time, the person's down, and the need to get you out of my space is already done. So the kind of weapon, whether it's a gun or something else, and also the kind of gun. There are all kinds of different firearms. The last serial killer that I did, his choice of weapon was a Smith & Wesson 357. It's a very uncommon gun. It used to be very common among police departments, but almost nobody carries this firearm anymore. So the fact that he picked that gun was very interesting and told me something about who he was as opposed to a Tech 9 or a Glock or a 9mm Beretta or something like that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
All right, I think we're out of time.
Is this slow?
Below right now.
Below right
Yeah,
now?
so we got to go. Thank you for having me and for your questions.